All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reed Blakemore. I'm the Director of Research and Programs for the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, and I'm pleased to kick off this panel this afternoon on the infrastructure backbone for energy security and regional energy cooperation. I think if we reflect on the conversations we've all had during day one of the Global Energy Forum this morning, I think we all can agree that energy security is the word of the day. I think the question we're asking ourselves is how we go about achieving that. And there's a number of words being thrown around, energy independence, et cetera. But the thing that sticks out in my mind is interdependence, right, isn't necessarily a bad thing. And in order to achieve that interdependence, we need infrastructure, we need energy connectivity to take electrons and molecules from point A to point B. And to facilitate that discussion, this is why I'm really glad to be hosting this panel today, because we have three speakers who each play a different role in establishing that connectivity, not just regionally, but on a global scale. So I'm honored to welcome Secretary General Jassim Al-Shirawi from the International Energy Forum, Deputy Director Thomas Hardy of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and Secretary General Osama Mubaraz of the East Mediterranean Gas Forum. Each of you represent absolutely critical institutions as we think about this idea of infrastructure, connectivity, et cetera. And so what I'd like to do to start is to turn to each of you and get your perspective, your reflection on what your organization's role is in establishing that connectivity, establishing that infrastructure. Deputy Director Hardy, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you very much, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for hosting this forum. I think this is a perfect opportunity, maybe not the best timing, but I think as we talk about dependence, interdependence, USTDA is focused more and more on energy infrastructure. As a US government agency, I'm fortunate to lead an agency that is focused on that energy backbone. Mm-hmm. USTDA is the first mover on infrastructure development. We take the earliest risk capital. At the bottom of the capital stack, we have grant funding to finance early stage project preparation, whether that's feasibility study, pilot projects, design engineering, front-end engineering design. That risk capital that our partners in emerging markets need, that US companies need to help de-risk their investments in emerging markets. As being the first mover, USTDA's look to more and more. We've been doing this for 30 years and have a long history of supporting core infrastructure. I look, when we talk about interdependence, many years ago, we were one of the first ones involved in the Lithuania LNG import terminal in Klaipėda. That's goes to the heart of interdependence. Lithuania saw what was coming down the pipeline, the challenge with Gazprom, and they turned to the US and said, help us bring that infrastructure to bear that we can get new gas into the European market. The result of USTDA's grant capital, kind of that early risk capital, has led to US LNG coming into Lithuania, but US LNG across Europe, and now just as of a month or two ago, into Ukraine. And that is the heart of what USTDA is designed to do, which is take that early risk to speed in and crowd in both US company, but also financing to make greater interdependence on energy infrastructure.
Secretary General, I'd like to ask you the same question. IEF is an impressive organization. You work globally with a lot of energy producers as well as consumers. How does IEF approach this issue of interconnectivity, infrastructure, and to pull off kind of a lot of the material that Deputy Director Hardy was saying, the idea of interdependence and collaboration?
Thank you. First, I would like to thank the Atlantic Council for giving us the opportunity to be here with you today. And congratulations on the 10th anniversary of the Global Energy Forum. And I'm pleased to be here with this distinguished panel. On the subject of energy security is no longer a question of just supply and infrastructure alone. It depends on how countries, markets, energy systems, infrastructure connects together. We talk about my organization, the IEF. This year marks the 35th anniversary of establishment of the IEF. The IEF was established to provide a neutral and inclusive platform for dialogue between producers and consumers of energy. Our membership consists of nearly 70 countries. We represent both producers and consumers and transit nations, covering governments in the advanced and emerging economies industry. We have an industry advisory council that has more than 50 companies covering all forms of energy, because our mandate covers all forms of energy, is oil and gas, renewables, hydrogen, nuclear, all the forms of energy. Inclusive dialogue contributes to deepen understanding, widen perspectives, and enhance channels of cooperation, and ensure that energy received where it's needed, particularly in situations where we have geopolitical crisis and when we have energy market disruptions. Producers need stable demand, consumers need reliable supply, and transit nations need predictable flows. The role of organizations like the IEF is to help to understand those interconnections, clarify interdependencies, and provide the confidence and trust in order to encourage capital flows and investment into resilient infrastructure and diversification. So it's important that the organizations like the IEF focus on dialogue, and this dialogue can lead to turn exposure into shared understanding, and shared understanding into better decisions, and better decisions can lead to greater affordability and supply and energy security.
Starting with cooperation, building to dialogue. I think that's a critical part of the discussion. Secretary General Mubarak, EMGF is actively doing the combination of diplomacy, infrastructure, but very much focused on a part of the world where this infrastructure and this regional connectivity is absolutely necessary. How do you see these conversations around energy security, infrastructure connectivity, kind of shaping the way that EMGF is approaching your work?
Thank you, Reed. Thank you for the question, and also thank the Atlantic Council for the invitation. It's a privilege to be within this distinguished panel. And as you said, the EMGF is focusing on the East Med region and also focusing on gas. It is trying to do a similar job like the IIF, but with a smaller focus regionally and also a specific energy source. And I think the disruption in the global energy system currently have shown that energy security is not just about providing supplies. It's also about diversification of routes of supplies. And this definitely, when we talk about routes of supplies, this is infrastructure. And this is part of what we are trying to do at the EMGF. The East Mediterranean has a lot of gas discoveries and a potential to discover more gas. But one of the challenges is that there is not enough infrastructure to get this gas from production sites into markets. That's why the first thing that we are trying to do is to align with our producers, consumers, and transit countries, is first to capitalize and use the existing infrastructure. And we have, I think, a very successful example between Cyprus and Egypt. Cyprus has gas discoveries that are not yet monetized. At the same time, Egypt has LNG facilities that can bring this Cypriot gas to markets. So the recent agreements between the two countries is an example of this in this regard. In addition to this, we're also trying to promote with our member countries and also our companies within the EMGF, how can we add the necessary pieces of infrastructure, either connecting the countries of the East Med, or also, especially within this disruption and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, how can we provide optionalities to the Middle East producers, to the Gulf producers, and taking advantage of the East Mediterranean geographical location being some sort of a corridor between the Middle East and Africa. And this is definitely has to do with infrastructure.
So when we talk about infrastructure projects, infrastructure development, it feels like there is a wealth of opportunities in terms of the projects that we can identify and we can build out in order to establish the infrastructure needed to provide the energy security we're looking for. I guess, Deputy Director Hardy, I'd be interested in your perspective, and particularly USTDA's perspective of how do we actually identify the infrastructure projects that matter most? And how do you then, after identifying them, get them through to and through the project financing stage?
Thank you. I think there's two issues that I'd focus on first. I think President Trump has laid out a roadmap for USTDA. Through his executive orders, USTDA was specifically called out to support opening markets for gas infrastructure around the world. And we're doing that. We launched the Global Gas Initiative with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, with LNG allies, likewise with nuclear. The president was very clear that nuclear is going to be the future for energy development, and USTDA was specifically called out saying, USTDA, you get out and be in the front driver's seat of this effort. And I think, so that's on the administration side. I think on the congressional side, we're in a unique position. As an agency, Congress has incentivized USTDA to take risk, to take smart risk. As an agency, we're being asked to make that early risk capital investment on technology risk. We've got SMR investments in Romania, Bulgaria, across the Indo-Pacific, investments that we know the technology is there. We know the U.S. investments going into the nuclear industry, and USTDA is being called upon to seed those markets. So when the technology is ready, the U.S. industry is well positioned. With that investment the USTDA is making, it's bringing along the Export-Import Bank. It's bringing along the Development Finance Corporation. When we first got into nuclear 5 years ago, DFC and XM didn't want to talk to us about nuclear. That was not where they were. Today, they're asking us more. Where are your investments? Where are you going? How do they how do they change their authorities to get greater cap to take those risky investments in nuclear, but critical investments for long-term economic development? So I think on the administration side, we're being driven by the president's executive orders. On the congressional side, they've given us a long lead to take smart risks on infrastructure development. And on I think what we were talking backstage is it's not just the big infrastructure. In this interdependent world, small economies, small island economies in particular, are hurting today. And we're working in the Pacific Island region. And Deputy Secretary Landau has been very, very active in the Pacific Island region and has come to us and said, help our partners in Tonga build out their gas storage capacity, their jet fuel capacity. And just this morning, they approved a project that we're going to be making that investment in Tonga to help them build their gas storage capabilities, but also looking at mooring capabilities, gas pipeline capabilities, so they can bring larger payloads into the economy and provide greater stability. And I think that goes to the heart of the interdependence that we're talking about today.
It's really about interdependence is going to require a level of additional risk tolerance, right? And where you make those bets does matter. It's the tricky business is how you go about making those bets. And when you're looking at some of the jurisdictions that you articulated, I think those are very almost geostrategic places to make those bets. Secretary General Ashrawi, I want to come back to you on this idea of cooperation and IES role as a place for dialogue. One of the challenges that I'm struck by with cooperation and dialogue at sometimes is you have individual national interests in terms of how they want to approach their own infrastructure, how they interpret their own energy security needs. And for example, that can vary based on different parts of the fuel mix that individual countries are interested in. I think that speaks to what you've articulated before is IEF taking a little bit of an all of the above approach, right? How does IEF build that dialogue to encompass the totality of options for energy security? And I think how do you do that in a way which supports additionality and actual complementary investment amongst your members?
Okay. Um, I think the organizations like the IEF need to clarify the interdependencies, need to make and assist in understanding the dependencies between the various energy systems, and also we have like three gaps that we need to fill. One is the connectivity gap, where energy needs to move from where it's produced to where it is needed most, and it has to be reached securely and affordably. And the world needs more energy. So all forms of energy need to be available, need to be capital and investment in all forms of energy, and to build the connectivity between the systems, you need to have more pipelines, more storage, more interconnections, more grids. So investment in all these systems need to be made. The second gap, I believe, from the IEF perspectives, is the resilience gap. So we need to have the capacity to deal with disruptions of energy and to have a cushion to manage such disruptions. And this building additional storage, transit, diversified transit routes. You have to have strategic stocks. You have to have additional production capacity. All these things need to be provided. I think the third priority or gap is the confidence and trust in the system. And this is the role of the organization like us, by having dialogue and by having market and data transparency, where the market needs clear signals in order to move investment and in order to have stable policies, frameworks. And we do this on a number of aspects, where we have dialogue between producers and consumers and industry. As I mentioned, we have the Industry Advisory Council. We have more than 50 companies in the energy spectrum that are involved in our Industry Advisory Council. And we meet regularly to have the dialogue between all the various stakeholders in the energy industry. And we have a trilateral program with the International Energy Agency, IEA, and OPEC, where we hold a number of events and meetings to discuss the issues that relates to the energy challenges. We also coordinate the Joint Organization Data Initiative. As I mentioned, data and market transparency is very important. JODI was established more than 20 years ago for JODI Oil, Joint Organization Data Initiative for oil, and for gas, natural gas, it's like 12 years ago. So it's providing a service to the energy industry in order to improve information and also build statistical capacity within the member countries. And we produce data for more than 110 countries for both oil and gas. And we are also considering expanding JODI to include other forms of energy as well. So by having all these events, and as well as the ministerial meetings that we hold every 2 years, where we have one of the biggest gathering of energy ministers in the world. Our next ministerial meeting is going to be held on October 11th this year in Riyadh, and the next one will be hopefully in Italy in 2028. So by cooperation can turn exposure into shared understanding, and shared understanding can turn into better decisions, and better decisions can lead to greater energy security, resilience, and affordability to various consumers.
I'm pretty sure that we should make attendance to the Global Energy Forum contingent upon whether or not each guest is an active user of Jody, because it's that good of a resource for everyone. Secretary General Mubarak, I think Secretary General Al-Shawawi articulated a number of kind of the infrastructure gaps that we see when we talk about regional interconnectivity, gaps in resilience, the need for pipelines, the need for storage, diversified transit, et cetera. Those are all features in almost what makes the Eastern Mediterranean an incredibly exciting place to talk about regional infrastructure, regional connectivity. Can you walk us through a bit further, those gaps in mind? What does make the East Med an interesting place, an exciting place to be talking about this? Because in some ways, yes, these are gaps, but they're also opportunities to strengthen that type of regional energy cooperation that I think we hope to see in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Definitely. I think the East Mediterranean has several advantages when we're talking about energy. First, there is a lot of gas discoveries with a potential to discover more gas, significant resources. Second, there is a lot of infrastructure that is existing and it already has LNG capacity. Third is that we have a huge footprint. The major IUCs are already operating there. We have the two biggest American companies, Chevron, Exxon, in addition to other European and other nationalities as well. And also the geography itself is definitely significant. East Mediterranean is brilliantly located, connecting Africa, Middle East, and Europe. So these are the features or the advantages. But again, geology and geography alone will not sort out everything. What we need to do is, as Jassim has been saying about the bringing not just dialogue, definitely dialogue is important, but bringing people and people's interests together. I think for a successful work to be done, it has to be win-win. And in this regard, we had our 10th ministerial meeting yesterday here in Washington, and it was hosted by the Department of Energy. And the ministers in the countries came together, again, recommitment of their collaboration and the value that they see of the East Mediterranean, not just for the East Med countries and people, but even the value proposition can go beyond this. It can be a valuable optionality to Europe, and also this connection, especially with the disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, can sort out a lot of challenges that the Middle East and the Gulf states are facing. So again, it is win-win, but we need to go beyond the alignment of policies and the dialogue into real projects. And this is, I think, one of the key themes of today's panel.
The Secretary General mentioned the need for every project to be win-win at a level. And Deputy Director Hardy, I do think you mentioned the Tonga approval, which is fantastic. I think that speaks to a need to make sure we're thinking globally about what those win-wins are. But I'm struck by when we look at emerging markets in particular, those win-wins can be a little more challenging to come by. When we think about how USTDA is approaching those projects for the needs of emerging market consumers, how do you strategize scaling power generation? Because due to project risk, due to cost, those win-wins can be a little trickier to craft from time to time.
Sure. I mean, we meet our partners where they are. I mean, we're not going to get a 1,000 megawatt power project in smaller markets, but the investments we make, as I said at the beginning, are smart investments, even in Sierra Leone. I was fortunate to lead this agency during President Trump's first term. And one of the investments we made in Sierra Leone was for a 100 megawatt gas-fired power project. Again, not 1,000 megawatts, but 100 megawatts. DFC has come in to finance that. What is the win-win? You now have Sierra Leoneans power, reliable power. U.S. companies, I believe, sold $400 million worth of exports. That's what we talk about when we talk about win-win. It is how do we help our partners support long-term economic development, but do it in a way that is opening markets for the export of U.S. goods and services, and increasingly, obviously, gas itself, the molecules themselves. I think the work, I've met with Secretary General Barros on a number of occasions. USTDA works in emerging markets solely, but the work that the Eastern Med does is so important, as he was saying, into Europe, throughout the Middle East, into Africa. They're that interconnector, and it's the work that if the Eastern Med gas forum gets it right, that's going to be able to drive new investments in Africa, in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, emerging markets in the Middle East, where we can make more investments. I think, and same with the IEF, it's having these forums that can raise up the partners so they can they find areas where they can cooperate. I think the more that happens through those dialogues, the better it is for us to have those win-win projects on the back end that provide long-term power generation, economic stability, but also regional stability.
And then Secretary General Al-Sharawi, I want to come back to you on this idea of fostering cooperation, particularly amongst your members. Obviously, I mentioned at the outset of this conversation, the preeminence of energy security has really taken root, and the way we talk about the urgency of energy security has grown in a positive direction, I think. But amongst your members, as you're facilitating dialogue, have you noticed a change amongst your members about how they talk about the role of infrastructure in providing that energy security? And how does IEF take that change in discussion and apply it into practice?
Well, I mean, when IEF was established, one of the main focus areas is energy security, and also market and data transparency, as well as energy transitions or additions, as now is being termed. So we focus on those three areas, and these are inbuilt in our program of work. And we are flexible in terms to the priorities that our members, when they meet, whether it's the governments or the industry. So it varies on situations where the situation calls for, energy security or data and sharing, and we try to focus into turning dialogue into more action and turn them into more meaningful outcomes that would help address the issues facing the energy industry. It's through the forums that we hold, the ministerial meetings, and through the trilateral program that we have with the IEA and OPEC, and through the JODI partner organizations. We always are flexible to be aligned with the market needs.
And then Secretary General Mubarak, one last question to direct to you before I think we begin to wrap the conversation up a little bit, which is, we've talked a lot about gaps and risks and opportunities in this conversation. If you were going to summarize, as we look to optimize our cross-border infrastructure, particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean, in a way which provides shared value amongst the various parties, but also fundamentally advances the shared need for energy security, what are the key factors that you're noticing that are shaping that pursuit? How do we optimize? How do we actually make all of this work in a successful manner?
Yeah, I think the first element we already touched base on this about the win-win, the shared value, talking about shared infrastructure for shared prosperity. The second element is how can we support, again, between the governments and the private sector? How can we identify the projects and develop these projects, package them in a way that can attract investments? I've been personally working with Tom and his team for a long time. So I think to some extent we understand what would make a project fly from the perspective of investments and funding. This is very important. And to some extent, this could be a gap in, in some of the regions. The second is, and I think the third element is resources underground does not have value. It's only when you bring those resources to surface, develop them, get them to the market, then you create the value. And this value has to be shared. You have producers, you have consumers, you have transit countries, you have governments, and you have the private sector. So it goes back to the win-win issue. The last, I think, element is that you try to turn challenges into opportunities. The energy disruptions now is definitely a huge challenge, regionally and globally. But what can we make of it? Each country, each region, how can we turn this into an opportunity that also sort out some of the problems to the others?
So the light is beginning to flash that we're running out of time slowly, but I want to do one last lightning round, and I'm going to go in reverse order this time, contrary to how we started. So a question right back to you, Secretary General. What are we missing in this conversation? I'm struck by, okay, we're spending a lot of time at this forum and in other conversations talking about, okay, energy security is the fundamental thing we need to pursue. And associated with energy security is infrastructure. How do we actually give that conversation more depth? What are we missing here on stage as we're having this conversation? What are our colleagues in this community here at the Global Energy Forum and beyond missing? What's the fundamental piece you think people need to take away in order to actually build the infrastructure needed to make energy security happen?
Well, I cannot say that we're missing, but if we're talking about this panel, I would have loved to get one of the operators, one of the investors who really do the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So you have a funding agency or an IFI, you have an international organization for dialogue between producers and consumers, and you have another organization focusing more regionally and on gas. If we can also bring to this discussions or the broader topic about infrastructure, the private sector who really does their job. And I think these different aspects of the, let's say, of the picture would make it fly.
It all comes down to putting dollars in the ground and building something ultimately. I think that's the right takeaway. Secretary General, from your perspective, what are we missing in this conversation to advance?
Well, I would agree with what my friend Mubaraz have just said, but also I would just like to add that energy is about people, and we must not lose sight of the human dimension. We often talk about barrels, megawatts, and other things that relates to the energy. They are all important, but we have to also consider that behind these we have households, we have workers, we have businesses, we have communities, we have national aspirations, and we all have to take care of those, and we have to look at what we do and ensure that we don't impact all those different concerns.
So we have financing and getting dollars in the ground to build something, not forgetting about the final consumer of energy as we have these conversations, because that's ultimately who we're trying to serve in this conversation. Deputy Director Hardy, what else are we missing in this?
It's interesting. I'm not sure I was missing, but I think something that we have to keep an eye on is the innovation that's taking place in the energy space. It's not just moving electrons. It's not just moving molecules. There is so much advancement in innovation, advancement in some of the investments we're making in deep borehole nuclear waste storage, things like that that are will transform the energy sector in the long term. I think keeping an eye on not just the basics, LNG terminals and so forth, but what is the next innovative step? We've got SMRs. We've got what, 3 different types of SMRs now. You've got microreactors. How do we keep a focus on what's next in the innovative space to make sure that our partners around the world understand what's coming down the pipe and are prepared to make those investments that will drive their economic growth in the long term?
So really not just only about what we need to build now, but what we might want to build and need to build well into the future in the tech stack. I think that's a great way to frame this. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to the audience. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.